What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are covering the last Annihilation, so let's just get right into it, right? This is an amazing story, and I'm curious to see how some of you guys handle it. So the thing about this is this initially picks up on what's basically Throne World 2, which is what used to be Hala, but is actually home of the Skrull and Kree Imperium. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what's really going on here, one of the things that Marvel did in recent years is they actually unified the Skrull and the Kree races. And those are actually led by Hulkling, who is one part Skrull. But of course, he's also with Wiccan, which is just kind of their thing, right? They're couple ruling empires together. How nice would it be to be able to just rule a combined empire and just kind of do your thing? But the thing about this is that these two groups operating in unison, this will actually be a major focal point in terms of why all this is happening once we get towards the end. But what ends up happening is that with the Kree and Skrull Imperiums basically unified, creating just one gigantic, massive empire, that the world is ultimately attacked by the Mindless Ones. Now, here's the thing. The Mindless Ones have been around in Marvel Comics for a really long time. They're kind of like the harbingers of Dormammu, right? Like a Mindless One appearing or an army of the Mindless Ones appearing is very similar to like the Silver Surfer showing up to your world. Galactus isn't far behind. In this case, Dormammu's not far behind because Dormammu rules the Dark Dimension, which is where the Mindless Ones reside. The other part of this is that the Mindless Ones have been depicted inconsistently over the years in Marvel Comics. They've been depicted as being incredibly capable and powerful, going toe-to-toe with like Thor and the Hulk and stuff like that. And then they've been shown as relatively easy to defeat. A lot of times, it really just depends on who's writing the story. In this particular instance, to really provide gravitas and to show us how dire and how dangerous they are, they're basically imbued with the power of Dormammu, so when they emerge, they're not easily destroyed. The bigger thing about this, though, is that the Mindless Ones are an infinite army. So sure, you might destroy the ones who show up here, more will simply just follow, right? It's kind of a war of attrition is really what's going on. Now, the other part of this is that Wiccan, for some of you all who ever read like Children's Crusade or anything like that, Wiccan is the son of the Scarlet Witch. He is destined to become exceedingly powerful, right? Like to become the new Demiurge and basically be a being of godlike power. He hasn't really reached that point yet. He is incredibly capable. I would argue he's not as powerful as the Scarlet Witch was during House of M, but he certainly rivals the power of Stephen Strange before Doctor Strange died. The thing about this, though, is that a being as powerful as Dormammu, basically imbuing the Mindless Ones with his own abilities, that's a huge thing, because for those of you guys who don't know where Dormammu resides in terms of the cosmic hierarchy, he's more powerful than Mephisto, which is no small thing. So again, it's pretty massive. The other part of this is that while this attack takes place, you ultimately have Dormammu who appears before the Guardians of the Galaxy using the body or kind of the planetary form of Ego the Living Planet. Now, it's basically Ego possessed by Dormammu. There's a reason why this happened. And again, this is one of those little mysteries that we'll find out later on. But a portal opens, and that leads to all these different forms of the Mindless Ones, kind of like these headless beasts or bodiless beasts that are showing up to attack the Guardians. Now, when this takes place, what we end up doing here is we actually switch over to Arakko, also known as Mars. Now, for those of you guys, again, who are just joining us here, one of the things that had happened during Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run is that there was a subsect of the mutant population which had actually hailed from a different dimension. They had been locked away there, and it's a whole great big huge thing. But basically, there were mutants that existed out there in the Marvel Universe that we didn't know about. Once they entered into the main Marvel Universe, they took up residence on Mars and they renamed it to Arakko. As it stands right now, Storm rules over them, so she's kind of like their queen or leader, if you want to call it that. But this basically leads to Peter Quill and Richard Rider here at this place talking about everything, because you had the Hellfire Gala and you had a whole bunch of things going on, but they're basically here kind of asking the question and talking about something called Mysterium. Now, Mysterium is a new material that was introduced into Marvel Comics, and it is a pretty significant material. It's not anything insane, but the reality here, and there's kind of going to be a kind of explanation that Dr. Doom offers later on down the line, but we can go ahead and cover it here. Mysterium is basically a substance that is formed within the White Hot Room and then is accessed by the mutant mutant population themselves. The White Hot Room is basically where the Phoenix resides, right? The full power of the Phoenix Force. It's one of those places that just kind of exists out there within the Marvel Universe. The reason why that matters is because when it comes to Mysterium and the White Hot Room, having a material that literally is channeled from what is in effect the wellspring of all creation is a pretty significant thing. But the funny thing about this is that despite all of its properties and its capabilities, which we'll talk about once we get to the conversation between Doctor Doom and Storm, Mysterium is not as durable as adamantium. It's one of the things that Marvel's always maintained. No matter what material you see in the Marvel Universe, nothing will ever be as durable or as strong as true adamantium, which is what's bonded to Wolverine's skeleton. So just kind of a way for Marvel to maintain that whole situation. Now, in the midst of all this, you basically have Moondragon, who's a telepath that exists out there in Marvel Comics, that's part of the Guardians of the Galaxy, communicating with Peter Quill and Richard Rider and telling them, hey, so like the Mindless Ones are basically attacking the Guardians of the Galaxy and Dormammu's invading the universe. So we need you guys to show up, do something, we need some help. And so what it actually does is it leads to Richard Rider taking off and then instructing Peter Quill to contact Abigail Brand and the S.W.O.R.D station. Now, for those of you guys, again, who are unfamiliar with this, the S.W.O.R.D station and really Abigail Brand were introduced back during Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men run in 2004. Abigail Brand had kind of led S.W.O.R.D for a long time when Marvel went into the Alpha Flight Protocol and basically had Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, leading the Alpha Flight Protocol. Abigail Brand was effectively ousted. She's more recently returned. Again, one of those instances when comics change but always go back to the status quo. But the thing about Abigail Brand is she doesn't really have any significant powers. She's a person that can speak any language from any race that exists out there in the universe. But S.W.O.R.D stands for the Sentient World Observation and Response Department, where S.H.I.E.L.D. monitors Earth, S.W.O.R.D monitors space. And so having S.W.O.R.D operate as kind of an extended arm of the mutant population, because Abigail Brand herself is a mutant, it allows mutants to kind of keep an eye on everything going on out there in the universe, should there be some kind of threat to them or anything else. But what this would mean is by contacting Abigail Brand, it could also invoke the involvement of the mutant population. And so where you do have a fight going on between the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Mindless Ones, and Gamora and Rocket Raccoon basically lose the protection of their ship and they're kind of stranded out there in space in the same way Peter Quill was in the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, Richard Rider, Nova, arrives just in time to save them. And at that point, we basically switch over to a moment when you have Hulkling that basically calls for the release of Captain Glory. Now, here's the thing about this, right? Captain Glory, he's a character that's relatively new. This guy's awesome. What's really kind of interesting about this, though, to be quite frank with you, he's very similar to the way Ronan the Accuser used to be in Marvel Comics. So Captain Glory was introduced to us really in like 2018 as part of the more recent Avengers run. But the idea behind this is there was a contest that took place between the Grandmaster, one of the Elders of the Universe, and a guy by the name of the Challenger. What ended up happening is that the Grandmaster formed what was called the Lethal Legion, where basically he started snatching these different individuals from points in which they were about to die. And that's what was going on with Captain Glory. He was literally involved in a fight. He was about to be destroyed. He was snatched up by the Grandmaster, brought onto his team, and then of course the contest ensued. And so as part of this contest, in the case of Grandmaster, if he lost, his team would go right back to the moment when they were supposed to die, and ultimately they would just simply perish. Now, because games with the Grandmaster are never as simple as they seem, ultimately the story came to an end, but Captain Glory and those guys ended up continuing on. It was a way for Marvel to introduce him into the universe and then sideline him until they could bring him back at a future point in time, this story being that instance. Captain Glory's dedication to really the Kree race is second to none. This guy he's a believer, right? Like, this guy follows the rules and the status of the Kree to a T. He's very much like Ronan the Accuser was way back in the day. And so with him being released, he's a very formidable person to have on their side because of his capabilities in leading the Kree armada, because of his intelligence when it comes to military campaigns. He's the guy you want on your side. He's like General Longstreet in the history of the American military campaigns, just one of the greatest commanders to ever live. And so what this does is it leads to him kind of unifying the forces under Hulkling. The problem is that as that happens, more Mindless Ones show up. And that's the issue that they're running into. That when it comes to Hulkling and it comes to the forces of the Kree race facing off against these different Mindless Ones, every time they destroy them, there's a brief lull in combat and then more portals open and they come right back out again. Again, it's a battle of attrition and it's wearing your enemy down. And so at this point, we switch over to Doctor Doom meeting with Storm. Now, this is not a meeting that you see very often, and it's actually really cool to see them interact. One of the reasons why this never really took place is because Storm was never a person who was in a position that, if we're being truthful, that Dr. Doom respected. The reality here is that Dr. Doom only respects people who have a certain level of rank when it comes to ruling anything, right? So like ruling a nation or something like that, so comparable to his sort of authority, a person who has a great deal of vigor that just has gumption, or a person who is equally powerful, right? It's one of those things, or equally intelligent. Dr. Doom is very, very specific about who he chooses to respect, and rightfully so, right? I mean, Dr. Doom's one of those guys where he can just do that, right? Where it's just like, hey, I don't know you, but I don't respect you. And it's just kind of like, I mean, okay, it's your thing, and you just kind of walk away. Only a fool is just like, no, Dr. Doom, we're all equal here, and you're really hurting my feelings, right? You know what Dr. Doom's gonna say? You tell Dr. Doom that he's hurting your feelings. You know what he's gonna say? He's gonna say, I'm gonna hurt a lot more than that if you don't get out of here. That's what Dr. Doom is gonna tell you, right? It's just one of those things. You don't go to Dr. Doom complaining about your feelings, right? Otherwise, you end up being held in a prison cell in Latveria for the rest of your life, and no one's gonna care enough to come looking for you. So the thing about this is that when it comes to the conversation between the two, the main focus of this is really Mysterium. It's Dr. Doom trying to understand what the mutant population is doing with it. Now, there is all the decorum, there's all the proper conversation and talk, and Dr. Doom, like, yes, of course I respect you as a leader, Storm. Storm sees right through it, right? I mean, she's not a fool. And it's one of the great things about Storm as a character. Ever since her introduction into Marvel Comics, she exploded onto the scene, and she's been hugely popular among X-Men fans ever since. I love Storm, right? I've always been a fan of Storm. She's just a great character, but she sees right through all the decorum and all the talk and all that glitz and glamour and all that kind of stuff. Storm is very much a no-nonsense woman, which is why I am so excited to see her in the MCU. And so that's when Dr. Doom basically drops all pretense, and he's like, I want to know what you guys are going to be doing with Mysterium. Now, initially, Storm and them didn't know that Dr. Doom even knew about Mysterium in the first place. Not only that, he knows where they get it from. He knows that, like, they tap into the power of the White Hot Room. Now, the response of Dr. Doom is, this is no small thing. What you're doing here is no small thing. You're literally tapping into a source of power and creation on a universal level. This is like you just goofing off with the Infinity Stones, right? Just using them as marbles against each other. This is not something that you do. You don't just mess with this level of power. So the fact that you're harnessing it and you're using it to create artifacts, arms, and armament, right? Using it to create this Mysterium element, you don't fully understand what you're dabbling with. Not only that, he says, because of what you're doing here, you're gonna start drawing the attention of people, right? Like, Dr. Doom says, to the best of my ability or to the best of my knowledge, one of the main principles of Mysterium is that it has anti-magical properties. You start messing around with the idea of anti-magic, you're gonna start drawing the wrong kind of attention. You're gonna start drawing the attention of people who want to see your empire and your ability to use Mysterium totally destroyed. And that's when Storm basically gets a call in from Abigail Brand, who'd been contacted by Star-Lord and saying, hey, so like, basically Dormammu's launching an attack against the universe. We're probably gonna need your all's help in some capacity. And that's when Doom chimes in and he's like, I told you that was gonna happen. I told you were gonna draw the wrong kind of attention for something. Now, what's kind of ironic about this is despite the fact that the X-Men are kind of the center point of Mysterium, which even then is a bit of a misnomer, it's actually S.W.O.R.D that discovered Mysterium and the ability to tap into it. But the reason why this is so interesting here is because this is the last time we see the X-Men. We're not gonna see Storm or any of the X-Men in the rest of this story. It literally just becomes a Dr. Doom-centric story after this. And so what takes place here is that with Dr. Doom traveling to meet with the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy, the question that they ask here is, why would Dormammu launch an attack against the universe, and why is Dormammu launching this specific attack? Now, again, these questions will be answered at the end of the story, so it really is an important thing that you guys stick around. But what Dr. Doom says is the particular planets that are being attacked by Dormammu, it's being done for a purpose, right? There's a reason why he's doing it. That the worlds that he's attacking, Spartax, Hala, so on and so forth, right? That if you actually map them out on a celestial chart, it forms a pentagram. That's literally what he's doing. That by attacking these different worlds and then conquering and subjugating these worlds, he's forming a pentagram on a universal scale, which he can use to enter into the universe. Now, this is one of those interesting moments when Marvel kind of, or at least the writer, introduces their own way for Dormammu to enter into the universe, because he can enter in through virtually any measure, right? There's all kinds of ways Dormammu can show up here. And so what they realize here is that on this sort of universal pentagram, there's a planet that's missing, right? There's a planet that they simply haven't discovered yet, that if this planet is under attack by Dormammu and he's able to subjugate this world, it would lead to him entering into the universe. Dr. Doom, analyzing all of this, comes to the realization that is the home planet of the Chitauri. Now, the funny thing about this, and this is what's so wild here, is he says, we have to basically form two strike teams, right? Rocket Raccoon has this idea, which honestly I, as Dr. Doom, find to be a little bit goofy, when he's like, we're basically gonna take a giant gun and we're gonna shoot Dormammu in the head. That's not really gonna work. And Dr. Doom's like, I get that's what you think of, Raccoon, because you're kind of stupid, but I'm smarter than you are, and I'm smarter than everybody else, so my plan is really the better plan. And so his idea is, we need to basically travel to the Chitauri homeworld, find out how far-reaching his ability to conquer that world is, and then hopefully stave off his ability to take over that world, and then in turn, find some magical process to defeat Dormammu. Here's the thing though, a lot of their abilities to do these things are all tied up. Doctor Strange is dead, right? Like, he's gone. Stephen Strange, he's out of the picture. That's what makes things so wild. And they could invoke cosmic entities or something like that, but for whatever reason that makes sense to nobody but the writer of the story, they don't. So what this basically does is it leads to them having to invoke magic in some capacity. And so he says, if the Chitauri are under attack, we would never know, because they would never ask for help. They would never ask for aid in any capacity. And so there is a bit of distrust that goes on here because it is Doctor Doom. And so it's like, I mean, do we trust this guy? I mean, it's Doctor Doom, right? Like, I mean, he's obviously got some kind of scheme up his sleeve. There's something that he's probably doing to either make this happen or is going to use the situation to his own advantage. But that's why everybody's sort of split, because one half of the group is like, I mean, what choice do we have, right? We're talking about magical energy, right? We're the Guardians of the Galaxy and miscellaneous other superheroes. We fight Thanos, right? Like, we beat up Thanos when Thanos has somehow emerged and has some kind of campaign. We face off against other alien races. We try to stop Galactus or the Silver Surfer. This is a whole different level of power, and it's one that we're not readily familiar with. And so in truth, they have to side with Doctor Doom. And so where Richard Rider is the odd man out, and he's like, no, I don't trust anything that's going on here. Like, I don't trust anything with Doctor Doom. Gamora ends up joining his side. Now, a lot of that's because Gamora and Richard Rider have a strong history together. Truth to tell, and I really hope we get this in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Richard Rider is one of the only people in Marvel Comics to climb Mount Gamora and come back for seconds. You know what I mean? Like, one of the very few instances where that ever happens. And so it's kind of like, I mean, it makes sense, right? They have a very long history together. They were part of the Select during the Phalanx story and Annihilation Conquest. So again, they've kind of been around the block together a few times. So it makes sense that she would ally with him. Everybody else ends up going with Doctor Doom. And so what's really cool about this is once they get to the planet of the Chitauri, Doctor Doom comes to this realization the whole thing's been conquered. And when they ask the question, how in the world could Dormammu conquer this place so easily, that Doctor Doom actually points out this really, really cool thing that I'd never considered before. That when it comes to the Chitauri, they have a hierarchical structure that's led by a matriarch. And it's actually being built on with the events of Secret Empire. Because if you guys recall that story with Captain America, one of the things Captain America had done when the Red Skull had changed his history using a cosmic cube is Captain America, as the leader of Hydra, had taken the Chitauri Queen and brought her to Earth. And so the Chitauri were constantly launching an attack against Earth as best they could in order to find their queen. It was a really, really cool thing. They'll literally destroy themselves in order to defeat whatever force they're going against to capture the queen. And that's why Doctor Doom says that was the target of Dormammu. That literally the Chitauri only ever exist in three forms. That you've got their baseline drones who just follow orders, then you have the ones who basically give those orders, and then you've got the queen who sends the orders out to the ones who give the orders. And it's really just that simple. So all Dormammu had to do was show up here, seize control of the queen, and the Chitauri race fell like that, right? It was just that quick. And so what Doctor Doom does is that where they kind of ask the question, then how the heck are we supposed to overpower these guys? Dr. Doom actually reveals that the vessel that they're on is not just a ship, that instead it's actually a terraforming platform. And what they do, or at least what the ship does, is it harvests the material from around Chitauri space, and then it starts producing Doom bots using those, which is amazing. So literally Dr. Doom has a ready-made vessel to produce an army of Doom bots, all of whom just come descending down onto the Chitauri and start annihilating pretty much all of them. Now, this is where things get really cool, because what happens here is that with Richard Rider and Gamora traveling to Hala under the idea that Hala is the least protected planet of all those planets that are out there, right? The most susceptible to an attack, that in turn, while he's fighting alongside Wendell Von Quasar and Phyla-Vell and so on and so forth, that he actually asked Wendell Vaughn, like, hey, so you talk to Galactus a lot, right? And Wendell's like, I mean, yeah, before Galactus was destroyed by Thor, yeah, like I talk to him all the time. And so he asked the question, which by the way, the story where Thor destroys Galactus, that's down in the description. It's every bit as awesome as you think it is, right? It was just an amazing moment in Marvel Comics. Galactus has been dead ever since. I can't wait for the story where he returns. I have no idea what story that's going to be. But he basically says, so like, Ego is part of the Eternity Watch, right? Like basically a gathering of cosmic entities that kind of did what the Guardians of the Galaxy did, but they were just less involved than the Guardians of the Galaxy were. And Wendell Vaughn's like, I mean, yeah, he was for a little bit. Why do you ask? And he's like, because when Ego was part of the Eternity Watch with Galactus, Galactus gave Ego the ability to grow a body, right? And that's when Wendell's like, yeah, but I mean, without Galactus here, Ego the Living Planet's not going to be able to grow a body in any capacity. But the reason why Richard Rider's asking this question is because out in space, an enormous portal has formed. And out of that portal comes the full form of Dormammu possessing the body of Ego the Living Planet. Now, here's one thing that I want to specify. Yes, this is Dormammu using the power that was given to Ego by Galactus to form a physical body for himself. This is not the quote-unquote true form Dormammu. If true form Dormammu entered into the main Marvel universe, this fight would be over like that, right? It'd be over in an instant. And so following this, what it does is it basically picks up with the implementation of Doctor Doom's plan. That what Doctor Doom reveals here is that as part of this plan, each of these members of the Guardians of the Galaxy were particularly assembled, or at least brought in by Doctor Doom. And the reason why he was so huge on having them is because based on the tarot cards, these guys need to be there. Now, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this is a relatively new development, not necessarily in terms of Marvel Comics, but in terms of Doctor Doom and how frequently they're implemented. So this goes back to the old Secret Defender stories with Doctor Strange in the 1990s. And the idea behind that story, or that line of comics, it was an amazing concept that was terribly implemented. But the idea behind that concept is that Doctor Strange would draw a series of tarot cards based on whatever threat he was facing off against, and whoever was on those tarot cards, that's the team that he would assemble. So say for example, and we're just using arbitrary names because I don't remember off the top of my head who was involved in any one of those particular stories. It was 30 years ago, right? Just bear with me here. But let's say that the tarot cards were drawn and it was Spider-Man, Wolverine, Blade, and like Captain America. That's the team that Doctor Strange would assemble to face off against like Mephisto or something like that. And so this is an instance where Doctor Doom is effectively doing the same thing. That according to the tarot cards, Drax the Destroyer, Moondragon, the daughter of Drax, Star-Lord, Groot, and really was supposed to be Gamora, that they all had to be here in order to make this work. Now, of course, Doctor Doom goes as far as to say that without Gamora here, that's fine. But each one of these individuals in some capacity has some sort of involvement with the cosmic energies that exist out there. As a really good example, Moondragon is a universal telepath. So she's a person that can kind of tap into the subconscious of everything in existence, and even the conscious minds of all things in existence, right? She's the Moon Queen, the mistress of dragons, the tamer of monsters, so on and so forth. But she represents the idea that some kind of wild beast, which is sort of what Dormammu represents, that he could be tamed, right? He could be controlled, basically harnessed, and just kind of have chains thrown around him, so to speak. But it's just kind of a general series of terms that I'm using for like basically reining in a beast. Everybody else plays a role similar to that, but by having them stand in particular locations and then casting a spell, what it does is it allows Doctor Doom to effectively form a pentagram. Now, the reason why that matters and why that pentagram is significant is because in doing so, it's able to tap into the power of Dormammu and then force him to falter, right? to siphon off a portion of his energy. Now, while it doesn't completely take away Dormammu's power, it's enough for him to kind of be like, what in the heck is that? Like, I don't understand what that is, right? That's literally what's going on here, is that it's enough to kind of siphon his power momentarily, which weakens him, and then it allows like Rocket Raccoon and the other forces of the Guardians of the Galaxy to literally fire off a massive gun and basically destroy the planet of Ego. When it destroys the planet of Ego, that removes the ability of Dormammu to possess it, and that in turn allows Dr. Doom to finish the spell, and then using the power of everybody else, force Dormammu back into his own realm, right? Back into the dark dimension, which basically brings an end to Dormammu, or at least his campaign here. Now, here's where things get cool, right? Here's where things get really, really interesting. So we didn't initially know why in the world this was all done in the first place, right? Why would Dormammu launch an attack against the main Marvel Universe? It's out of character for him to a degree, right? When Dormammu does something like that, one, it's usually on a grandiose stage, and two, it's usually because in some involvement, he'll reference like Stephen Strange. It would be more in line with what Dormammu would do if he was like, now that Stephen Strange is dead, I'm launching my attack. That's more like what Dormammu would do here. So the question is, why would he launch his attack? How did he even get here in the first place? How did that happen? So what we end up doing is actually picking up with a conversation with Dr. Doom. And he says, perhaps some spark of sentience remains in the floating rubble, perhaps not. Either way, it is over. Ego the living planet is destroyed, and he's no longer possessed by Dormammu. And that's when Dr. Doom says, it was a gamble, true. Had the raccoon scheme failed, the Dark Lord might have destroyed us all. But Doom does not gamble against the odds. All went as planned. And that's when this person says, as we planned, Doom, and he says, as I planned, but you played your part to perfection, Sister Talianis. Now, here's the thing about Sister Talianis. She is a relatively new introduction into Marvel Comics. I believe she's going to become a significant player in Marvel because she is a person that actually stood against the entirety of the Kree and Skrull Imperiums uniting, but she's also someone that can tap into magical power. That seemingly, Dr. Doom literally says, my involvement would have raised suspicion, but you could seduce Ego into your cult of vengeance, opening the door for his possession by Dormammu, and thus for Dormammu's own campaign of conquest, all according to my design. You did my work well, sister. And so that's when the question now becomes, okay, so if Dr. Doom orchestrated the entire invasion of Dormammu into the main Marvel Universe, why? And so what happens here is that where Sister Talianis says, in the meantime, did you get all you wanted from this game, Lord Doom? Because this was all done, at least as far as Sister Talianis' concern was, so she could basically conquer like Chitauri and stuff like that. Not a major focal point for her character. I think she will become important later on, but Dr. Doom literally says, I did not get everything I wanted. The mutants remain obdurate, which I don't even know what in the hell that word means. We'll just call it obstinate, right? They refuse to cooperate. I assume that's what it means given the context. And he says, though perhaps I have planted the seed of doubt in them, and the sword of space remains with Hulkling, but I have the magic of Dormammu, far more of it than the Guardian's guest, bound into my armor until I choose to unlock it. A potent weapon which I will keep to myself until the proper moment, until the events of Reckoning War. That's literally why Dr. Doom did this. Dr. Doom orchestrated this entire situation so he could steal a portion of Dormammu's power. Because truth to tell, regardless of how powerful Dormammu is, it's a fool's errand if he were to just go into the realm of the Dark Dimension, attack Dormammu, try to steal some of his power, and leave. He would face certain death. Either that or Dormammu would seize control of Dr. Doom and then invade the main Marvel Universe. And imagine Dormammu channeling the power of Dr. Doom along with his own power in the main Marvel Universe. I mean, that's a story I would read, right? Like Dormammu possesses Dr. Doom and attacks the main Marvel Universe. That story would be dope. I'm not even gonna lie, I would read the hell out of that. But that's the whole thing behind this. Dr. Doom implemented this whole scheme, set this whole thing up just to steal a portion of Dormammu's power. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.